to start by acknowledging that we meet on the land of the Ngunnawal people tonight, and we acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and we pay respect to their elders, both past and present. I'd like to extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in attendance today, and the Australian Institute's very proud to support the Yes campaign for a referendum in Indigenous voice to Parliament. Tonight, we're very happy to have two wonderful guests. I'm not sure who came up with doctors in the house, but we do have two doctors in this house. We also are so lucky to have two wonderful new members in the House of Representatives here with us tonight. We're so lucky to have Dr. Monique Ryan and Dr. Sophie Scamps. I'll introduce all them in a second more formally. Before we get started, in case you haven't been to Politics in the Pub, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We like to put Politics in the Pub on about once a month or so. As you may know, my colleague Ebony usually MCs, but she can't be with us tonight, and I'm really happy to be here tonight chatting to these guys. If you're not on our mailing list, the best way to know about our events and what's coming up next is to join onto that mailing list, so we can let you know about the next event that we've got scheduled. So if it's your first time to Politics in the Pub, thank you very much. Welcome, and I promise we'll be gentle with you tonight. We'll hopefully have some time for some questions from you guys before the end. But tonight I'm really going to just be asking some questions and also just trying to get some reflections from these incredible new members of our House of Representatives. So without any further ado, let me introduce Dr. Monique Ryan, who you may or may not know is the member of Kooyong, who you may or may not know beat Josh Frydenberg. And sitting next to her is Dr. Sophie Scamps, the member for Mackellar, who you may or may not know, beat Jason Falinski of a margin of 14%. 14%. So let me just start with you, Monique. Why didn't you get a swing as big as Sophie's? And you heard it from a doctor. So, no, look, I mean, obviously we're going to talk a lot tonight about what happened at the last election, but really what we saw was something transformative of our parliament. We've seen, we saw incredible debate before the parliament, before the election, I should say, and afterwards. We're so lucky to have these guys here with us tonight. I guess I want to talk to you both a bit about that, about the campaign and why you think it mattered, about your reflections on the first year, and of course some of the big policy things that you're both working on. But let me just start with you, Monique. I saw were up at the crack of dawn, being friends of electric vehicles this morning, and here you are at 6:30 at night talking to people who can't even vote for you in your electric. Or maybe they've come up. I've underestimated them. But no, seriously, it's a really tough job being a parliamentarian, and I often make the point that you can't have democracy without politicians. I'm never going to ask a politician to complain and say it's a hard job, because voters don't want to hear it. But how have you found the transition from working in a hospital, doing incredibly important and hard and long work there, to working in Parliament, and what does that transition mean for how our democracy works? Is it how do we get people to want to do this job?
It's funny actually. My mum asked me on the weekend, was I happy that I've done it because I miss medicine? I get asked that a lot, and it's really embarrassing because I know I'm supposed to say yes, I miss it dreadfully, but the fact is I don't. And I think that's because I've gone from a job which I really loved, which was absorbing and worthwhile and engaging and endlessly interesting, to one which is all of those things on steroids.
Mm.
It's a completely different job. Still dealing with lots of children, but
do you get to use knives as much?
Sadly not. Not yet. It's just the most engaging job. I had no idea what to expect, is the honest truth. When I was elected, I didn't expect to be elected, and When I got to Canberra, when we had to set up, when we got to the point where we were setting up the electoral office, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to start. Had no idea what the job would entail. It has been an extraordinary year. You know, it's had its challenges, let's face it. But I couldn't have, I still, every day, I remember at one point Helen Haynes said to me that every time the speaker said, I give the call to the member for Indi, she still gets a frisson where she thinks, wow, it's me. And it's me. Every day I come to Canberra, I think, I can't believe
I had been looking after a cohort of patients, and I had always had this niggling feeling in my mind that actually there was more that I had a master's in public health, and I knew with affordability issue that I really knew there was a lot more I could be doing to help the whole population. So, and also the key thing as well, I hear it a lot now because we're debating the voice. And getting the right diagnosis, so you actually know to stop and listen to what people are saying to you. So I think there was really good training to be a politician. I was just saying when I was driving here to the taxi driver, I'm not sure whether I'm a politician or a doctor. Which am I? I'm not sure when the transformation happens.
Well, sticking with the medical theme, I mean, you know, medicine's often dealing with people who are sick, who've had injuries, and then of course part of medicine is public health and actually trying to make the population, you know, healthier by avoiding all of whether it's occupational health and safety or lifestyle illnesses. But that tension between, do you spend resources fixing a problem in front of you, or do you step back and try and solve the big picture problems? I mean, haven't you stepped into exactly the same problem in medicine? Like, how as a parliamentarian do you figure out, do you focus on the specific issue facing us today, or step back and think, no, we've got to think about what's going to happen in 10 or 15 years?
Look, interesting you should raise that, because this morning I was not at the EV combi thing, which would have been great, teal combi electric vehicles, but I was at the Future Generations, the Parliamentary Friends of Future Generations, and it was looking at exactly that question: how do we get long-term policy making? Particularly this session was about in our economy, how do we make those long-term plans so we're not just constantly every 3 years having to, you know, fall off a funding cliff or make new policies. So we have major challenges ahead of us, again with climate change, something that needs long-term vision, and how do we do that is a really, really important question that we need to ask, and at the moment we're not doing it terribly well. If we look at health, then I think a big part of what I've been advocating for is this prevention and health promotion. We've got to stop pouring money in at the big hospital end. We need to actually put it into prevention, because we know that will be helping us all live healthier lives. So I've got this junk food advertising bill coming in, and even just talking to the health minister today about how we actually prevent our mental health epidemic that we have. We keep talking about how we need more treatment, but how do we actually prevent that is a challenge for us to deal with as politicians.
I also really think that having people with lived experience in things that matter coming to Parliament and adding their experience and their viewpoint has improved Parliament. And I know that when I stood for election, a lot of people said to me, "Oh, look, we need you to stay in the hospital. The job you do is important." And I was like, "Well, yes, that's true, but you can affect so much more change in our country's Parliament than you can when you're working as a clinician in a public hospital, constantly frustrated, constantly running into walls, and constantly saying, I mean, it was a selfish thing for me to run, because I was like, someone's got to do this. Someone should do this. I'm getting so frustrated that we're not changing all these things and doing all these things that need to be done." And at some point, obviously someone said, "Well, why don't you just do it?" I was like, "Fine, I will then."
And you thought that was selfish?
Well, no, it is in a way, because for me it was, it wasn't like, it was like, I think someone needs to do this, and if I'm in a position where I potentially could do it, I should. But I do think that for lots of people saying, "Well, why should we elect you?" It's like, because 11% of our country's economy is health related, and I have experience in that, and I know what works and what doesn't work. I understand healthcare professionals. I can work with them. I'm pragmatic. I really hate money being wasted, so I think I can make a contribution in that area. And then when you get to Parliament, you realise people do respect that experience. And I think that's one of the things that the community independents bring. With Allegra, it's experience in tax and in how businesses work. With Kate, it's in how the not-for-profit sector works. With Zali, it's the law. That I do think that contribution is respected by the Parliament, and I think that's one of the contributions that we can make.
Well, on that, I guess, diversity was a big theme of the last election, and I don't think it's an accident that so many of the independents who were elected were women. How have you found sort of entering the new Parliament as a group of new entrants, as a group of threats to the status quo? You walked in there as a large group of new entrants. Is the building welcoming of new entrants, or is it kind of comfortable and trying to keep people out?
I think they're welcoming. I think the big question was, how did they deal with us more than how did we deal with them? I think there was a lot of uncertainty how to deal with this new group, because it really was a new phenomenon, and I think there was a bit of kid glove handling at first, but it has been on the whole a really positive experience, and I do think the doors are open to us. And I think that whole rhetoric beforehand about doing politics differently, trying to work constructively and collaboratively, I think we are really trying to do that. And I think the government is trying to respond. They probably don't always, because they have their own agenda. But when it comes down to it, I think as an independent, you have that freedom to speak up on issues that are important to you and your community. And that is extremely powerful. And we can take those issues directly to the ministers. But it also, often there's issues that either the government or opposition won't be able to touch. And I feel like I have the freedom and the others have the freedom to raise these issues and call it out. So a really big part of what I see my role is holding the government to account, making them stick to their promises. And, what did they say they would do, and making sure they're doing what they said they would do, and then pushing them to go further on many things and questioning what they're doing. Not just a hard no, not just an opposition, but coming together to find better solutions.
Monique?
So the government did have this whole lot of language about we're going to do politics differently, and it was going to be a different politic when they were elected. And I don't think that we've quite seen that to the extent that we would have liked. But we have to earn respect as well. The coalition, I think, has seen us as a troop of overfed, overpaid white women. Who, really, as doctors, we should be doctors' wives, not doctors. when we're sort of missing a noun there, but and they've tried to push, and when we've pushed back, they've been like, oh, and I think that we have needed to push back at times, and we have done that with some effect already.
You certainly pushed back on Peter Dutton at times.
Well, yeah, I have, but the day that Peter Dutton had to go at me about the going to be Prime Minister thing, that was a day when I'm a first term politician. I'm a newbie. I've got a small team which is going through a difficult time. I've got other members of the crossbench who are feeling a bit under siege as well, and he felt the need to make a joke. And it was important actually for me to say, bring it on, and we're up for that. And he hasn't done it since. No. I wish he would.
I think he's terrified, Mon. 100%.
It's not a bad thing.
No.
We had to earn respect, and that's fair enough. But if we do earn that respect, then that's good. I do think, and we've seen it this week repeatedly, sadly, that there are really significant cultural problems in both houses of Parliament still, and we're seeing them play out again and again. And I think that hopefully we've made some difference to that, but not nearly enough, not yet.
In terms of new entrants, one of the bills that one of the ideas that you're pushing at the moment, Monique, is to lower the voting age to 16. Now, as the father of a 16-year-old, I have mixed views about this. Convince me that we should be letting more people vote.
That's an easy one, actually, Richard. So
I'll introduce you to Henry.
The UN says that, if you look at the Charter of Human Rights, we should be giving 16-year-olds a vote because they have the cognitive, the cognitive and physiological maturity to do so. Your cold logic, which is what you do when you're making a reasoned decision, is as mature at 16 as it is at 24. So that's one thing.
Pretty low, yeah.
For a bloke.
Yeah. Ouch. They're tough, aren't they?
Yeah. But at the same time, lots of I've got a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old, and there was a figure that came out recently that 1/3 of 20-year-olds in Australia don't know who. No, 1/3 of 20-year-olds in Australia can name the treasurer. I was like, surely not. I tested it out. It's true. That when kids have left school and they're 18 or 19, it's probably the worst time to give them their first vote because they're distracted. They're going off to uni or to study or to travel. They're often leaving home. And most kids in Australia have not had any civics education since they were in grade 6. Whereas if you give them the vote at 16 or 17 and you bring them in, you give them decent civics education at school, they had the chance to talk about their first vote with their peers and with their parents. They're much more likely to be invested. So in Austria, where the voting age has been dropped to 16, and there's lots of countries around the world where this has happened, voter participation has improved. So in some ways it's a generous measure, but in other ways it's not. And many, many young people who would otherwise perhaps get a bit disengaged will become engaged, I think, if we bring them into the fold and give them a chance to talk about the things that, let's face it, we're voting on, but are going to affect them a hell of a lot more than they're going to affect us. Housing affordability, HECS debt, tax, climate. They're things that those kids are going to live with for a lot longer than we are.
All right, you persuaded me.
Okay.
Sophie, one of your private members' bills is stopping jobs for mates. Apart from wanting to know how I can get a job working with you on that, what
It was something that was driven by the people across Australia because they want to be able to trust their politicians. But it really is only the last sort of line of defence in many ways. It's the safety net. After corruption has already occurred, then it can be investigated. So we want to prevent it. And when I talk about corruption, I don't just mean criminal corruption. I mean not acting in the public interest. We have been elected to act in the public interest. And if we're not acting in the public interest, then we're not doing our job. And so it's what my Ending Jobs for Mates is all about, building integrity into the system so that we can have greater trust. And I guess the main pillar of my Ending Jobs for Mates bill is this sort of arm's length independence, having independent selection panels that actually choose from the list of candidates. They choose the shortlist, and then the minister can choose from that shortlist. So it just means that we're getting the right people, and it's at arm's length from the minister in many ways. Because at the moment, it's totally up to the minister's discretion. And even today, we heard that Greg Combet had been chosen as the head of the Net Zero Authority. And I love Greg Combet. He's actually a personal friend. But the thing is, again, there's that perception across the country, this is a job for mates. How do we know that he was independently selected and he was the best person for the job? So as much as, you know, he may be, the country needs to be able to trust that the right person for the job has been selected, and then coming out of those really important bodies, that the right decisions are coming from those bodies as well.
Thank you. So I guess related to the issue of who we listen to is, of course, the voice. And both of you are strong supporters of the voice. You're out there talking in the community at the moment. The Australian Institute does quite a lot of polling on this. Our polling says what other people's polling says, that support for the voice is declining. By the way, it's still, I think, more likely to get up than not. But why do you think that support for the voice is declining? Or do you think it is? If so, why? And what the hell can we do about it?
It's difficult. I mean, in Kooyong, we're probably in a little bit of it's like, as we are possibly tonight, preaching
the People's Republic of the ACT. Welcome.
It's hard to know because you sometimes feel like you're just talking to your friends. In Kooyong, we're door knocking. We've been actively door knocking now for a couple of months, and a third of people have no idea what the voice is. So that's the first problem. They just do not know. And this is one of the better educated electorates of Australia. And I'm hearing that in WA, people have got absolutely no idea. So that's a real problem. And I have to say that's on the government and on the campaigns that they're supporting, or Yes 23 or the other campaigns, because I think there's a real failure to cut through. Yes, it's a problematic that the opposition has decided to oppose it. I still think that Australia, on balance, would be in support of a voice if they understood what it was. But it's a really iterative process, and they've kind of left it to the grassroots with a little, I think, too much of a wink of and a prayer. And so I do hope that things are going to mobilise in the next few months, because, I know I'm not supposed to be negative, but I would hate to wake up the day after that referendum to an Australia that had not voted for a voice.
I'm still quite optimistic, or very optimistic, about the voice, because I feel like the grassroots campaigning is just getting started, and I feel that in my own electorate, and I feel like there's a lot of us that are just kicking off. We know, and we're still not that close to the referendum. We know what happens in an election campaign. Most people are disengaged until the last couple of weeks. What is it? Okay, I've got to decide. And people often don't decide until they're in that queue, and looking at the how to vote card. So in Mackellar, and I know a lot of us are about to kick off our grassroots campaign, and I really see it as, people have legitimate questions. What is this? As Mon said, a lot of people don't know about it. So it is providing that information. It is answering people's questions, and it's just keeping it simple. And I think the opposition has tried to complicate it and worry people and feed on fear. And I think if the grassroots is there knocking on doors and answering people's questions, I think we'll see a flow on from that. I'm quite optimistic and looking forward to that campaign.
Great. Speaking of questions, we'll come to questions from the audience soon. So if you do want to ask a question, there's a mic up the front, and I'll just warn you now that we only take questions, not statements. And I will shut you down. So if you can think up a question that you want to ask, please start to formulate that and come up and form a bit of a queue at the front. But I've got a few more left for myself. So climate change, obviously, it was a big issue for your campaigns. Obviously, for Scott Morrison, waved a lump of coal around, was quite proudly kind of opposed to climate action. The Albanese government's been elected on a platform of being heaps better than Scott Morrison on climate change. Pretty low bar. But both of you are literally living proof that the electorate wants change on these issues. The Parliament has introduced changes, but still, if we want to be honest, we're still ignoring the science of climate change when we're setting targets. We're still ignoring the science of climate change when we're opening new coal and gas. Literally, you guys have done your bit in replacing MPs that were opposed to climate action with a promise to do more. But what are we got to do to get a Parliament that actually takes the science of climate change seriously?
I agree, Richard. I think the changes we've got in so far have been modest and we need to do a lot more. And I think Monique would agree that our role on the crossbench is really to continue to push to the government to do more and also provide that social license. But a lot of people say, well, what can you do if you don't have the balance of power in the House of Reps? I actually see a huge part of our role is continuing to be another voice or informing the national conversation. And it really comes from the people who drive change. It comes from the population that demand change and drive change. And we saw that happen, as I mentioned, at the last election with the Integrity Commission. That came from the people. The people demanded that we have that. And also the change as well around climate. And so I think a big role that we have to play is keep representing our electorates in the media. It's what we do inside Parliament House, but what we do outside Parliament House is just as effective or even more powerful. And it's just adding to that narrative and continuing to push for more, so that we were fed something for the last 10 years that really was regressive on climate change. We need to change that narrative so that we look at the opportunities and we speed things up and we start acting and we get the country excited. But in the end, it will be the population that drives this and demands this. And our role is to help inform that conversation, that national conversation.
Yeah, so obviously you're completely right. It's not enough. It's nowhere near enough. But it is a little bit like turning around the Titanic. Yeah. You can't do it in 12 months. Well, I mean, you probably could have turned the Titanic. Probably
Titanic sank, by the way.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. You're right. No, but I think it is a little bit like, and I think there will be a moment where that moment of inertia is overcome, and we will do that. And yeah, we've all heard, all of us, I think, have heard, oh, you can't do anything because you haven't got the balance of power. And at first, I sort of thought perhaps that was true. We've realised that is not the case at all. We actually can exert lots of pressure on the government. And someone said to me recently, being in government is about power and being in opposition is about pressure. That's what we are doing. We are the sensible centrists who are exerting pressure in a way that the opposition is not, because they're just a blanket no and they're not engaging with the important questions. What we have done is we've been a bit pragmatic, because the reality is we're single people representing single electorates, and we've got a relatively small number of teams. We have divided amongst ourselves the independents, interest and expertise and the things that we're going to concentrate on, and we will do that. And we're pulling lots of levers and pushing things, and I think we are having an effect. It's not enough yet, but I think cumulatively over time it will be. I hope so.
Speaking of balance of power, I mean, I don't want to make a prediction about the next election. I made a shocker in 2019. I wasn't alone. But Labor has a very slim majority. They'll likely lose seats in Western Australia. So it's not unlikely that you might wind up sharing balance of power after the next election. Is that terrifying or exciting, or...?
Can I just say Monique will have to fight Peter Dutton for the Prime Ministership?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. If Bill Shorten had won the election, the Teal independents would not exist. Is one thing I'd say. I don't know what's going to happen after the next. It'll be fascinating. We are in a difficult position, the community independents, each of us, because we are going to be under at the next election, whenever that is, and it could be as early as August or September of next year, which is also a frightening thought. We will be under major attack from all of the major parties, and certainly I'm sure, Sophie, you're in the same situation as me. I know that the Liberal Party wants the blue ribbon seats back, and they are going to come at us very hard.
Sophie, excited, scared?
Look, I think it's an exciting future. I think, there was again a fear campaign. If too many independents get in, it's going to rock the boat too much. Parliament won't work. But I actually think we've shown that we can work very constructively across the political spectrum on solutions, and that's what the Australian people want. We've got major challenges ahead of us. They don't want bickering. They want solutions, and they want us to be working towards that in a constructive way. I know that there's also a really strong movement out there called the Community Independent Project. So there may be more independence, and it may be a new way of doing politics. Again, I would certainly welcome more independence on the crossbench, and I think that we don't actually have to. One or two people don't actually have to side with whoever wants to make government. It could just be supply and the rest of it.
Now, on that, I have a controversial view on this, perhaps, but a lot of people are concerned about donations in politics. People, they see what Clive Palmer did. They want to get money out of politics. But as someone that's watched politics very closely for a long period of time, most people perhaps don't understand that, say, the Liberal Party in Victoria probably gets 90% of its money not from donations, but from public funding. And that donations are actually really important for new entrants, whereas, incumbent parties, big or small, get public funding from previous elections. They get incredible benefits of incumbency of, literally just being in Parliament. And also, there's things like the Liberals' McCormack Foundation that's about $100 million in it, which each election spits out about $7 million to the Liberal Party. To be clear, they've already got the donations. They're now just sitting on a big pile of cash. So I don't know what you guys think about this, but next week, the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters report will come out. I think a lot of people are excited about donation reform. I'm actually worried that if we don't get it right, donation reform might be really good at helping incumbents, of which you are now some, and actually making it harder for new entrants to get into Parliament.
Yep, I've got similar concerns. Of course, we will stop the Clive Palmer phenomenon, but one of the concerns I have is that we don't want to inadvertently undermine our democracy by not allowing more community independence or people who come up through their communities to actually get elected. I helped bring together the grassroots movement in Mackellar. And we knew that one, community was absolutely the most important aspect of it, but we also knew we needed to run a professional campaign if we were going to win. The history, of course, was 80 years of one politics, and it's very hard to get an independent in. So what becomes really important is just letting people know that there's an alternative, that there is somebody else who's standing, and you need to let people know what that person is standing for as well. It's a huge job, and actually, so I would say that I did spend a lot of money just raising that profile. And if we want to keep community independence, an option, then we do have to look at that donation reform quite closely. There's another thing I would say, and that is about expanding the definition of what a donation is. At the moment, I think, how much would it be? But, more than 50% of donations are actually, all money that comes into the parties are not regarded as donations, so membership fees, type of thing. And they bring in, millions of dollars, and that is not regarded as a donation. And there's so much dark money that we actually have to firstly expand or define what a donation is. So we have a challenge ahead of us. We do want to take big money out of politics, but how do we do that in a way that doesn't undermine grassroots community independence coming through as well?
I would argue, Clive Palmer spent a lot of money for very limited benefit. And I know that ALP's crossed with them because they feel that he cost them the 2019 election. But for the rest of us, so what? That was a problem potentially. But if that's what you wanted, the outcome you wanted. But, he didn't actually succeed in electing a whole lot of people. The reality is that we know from what's happened in New South Wales and Victoria at a state level is that if you really limit campaign donations and spending caps to the extent that you might think heuristically would be a good idea, you do disadvantage small parties and independents. And I know that in Kooyong, I was a nobody. I was well engaged in the community. I've lived there for a long time. I had a good circle of family and friends and whatever. But I was up against the Treasurer of Australia and the second most senior member of the Liberal, and there's no way I would have won had there been the sort of donation caps that are being tossed around. Now, whether or not you think that's a good thing, I wouldn't have been able to compete. And so, as I said, Josh Frydenberg has a private vehicle called Kooyong 100, and it received $2.5 million in the 3 years prior to the 2022 election and did not declare a donor. And then, so there's a huge amount of coverage about the donations that we received, support from specific organisations like Climate 200, but they were all declared, and Climate 200 had 6,000, I think, donors to that body, which then donated to lots and lots of different candidates. But I was up against someone who spent at least twice what I did, but has not to declare that. Even today, again, it's happened. I think this is the third time that the AEC has queried my return. It's about something to do with, it keep coming at us, and it's not a level playing field. It just isn't. And there's a real danger. And I'm all for kind of, donation reform if it can be affected in a way that works. It was crazy the amount of money that got spent in Kooyong. It was wrong. It's unethical. It's immoral. But I spent less than half of what Josh Frydenberg spent. But I can say that, but I can't prove it because he hasn't had to declare it. And so there are for me, there's dangers. They're just.
Yeah, and I guess for me, what's important about this is we get some principles in place, and the principle of transparency, I think it's very, very easy to go along with. The principle that we don't want to make it hard for new entrants to compete is relevant, but I think just kind of confining the debate to donations, I don't know, test the room. I don't know how many people here have kind of thought about the fact that maybe the major parties want donation reform, make it harder for new entrants. Who'd thought hard about that before tonight? Pretty good trick, hey? All right, so I scared people off. No one's even approached the mic yet, so I'm just going to ask one last question, and I'm sure someone is going to want to ask a few as well. But yeah, just on that transparency, you both talk about kind of scrutinising what the government of the day does. You both talked about lack of transparency in things like donations and appointment processes. As parliamentarians, you have better access than average to things like public service through and to the parliament and the government of the day. As MPs, do you think the public service, keep in mind you're in a hostile public sector town, do you think that the public service is serving the parliament, or are they serving the minister when they're answering questions, when they're providing information? Are you getting the information you need?
Well, I think last week we saw the National Audit Office came out with an analysis of the community health program, the grants program, that was initiated in 2018 by the Morrison government, and which spent it had a budget of $2 billion, but only, because it was really inefficient, only managed to spend $1 billion. McCulloch was only $1 billion on what was essentially pork barrelling, largely in marginal funds. And the ANO report, I downloaded it the other night and took it home, and I was reading it in bed, and I said to my husband, am I mad? I mean, this is unbelievable. It was using the language it used. It was said it's unethical. It was unlawful. The health department was hearing about grants through media releases, but the problem was that it actually said, it's quite open about this, it said these grants are not lawful, but this is how we'll roll them out. And so that is the problem. It's not just that the minister was using this $1 billion slush fund as a slush fund, it was that the health department was complicit with it. Now, there's reasons for that. One of them is the excessive consultancies, $20.8 billion spent by the government last year on outsourcing these sorts of things. So the public service are eviscerated. They're scared for their own jobs. And if they don't give the ministers the answers that they want, they can be gone too. So the whole process is subverted. So there are major problems with the public service, and I'm not blaming them. But it's going to take years and years to right this ship. It's deeply problematic. And that's just health, and I know from my own experience in health, that is just the start of health. And I don't even know about other departments yet.
Mon has absolutely nailed it with that answer. It was extremely startling to hear that report, wasn't it? And it was just as scathing, but as blistering. But I think it was shocking many people to hear that the public service was subverted in that way. I mean, these health grants came out just before the election. It was obvious that they were being used as electioneering. So it is something that, yes, we need to hold the government to account on and make sure that public service is providing that frank and fearless advice that we would, expect them to do.
Great. Okay, so we've got a bit of time for questions. Hint the word questions. So let's see if we can get a question.
Where do we go to from here on tax?
Where do we go to from here on tax? Yes, we've got stage 3 tax cuts coming up, and we also have so many challenges ahead that our country needs to fund, with defence, with climate change, and the NDIS, with health, with aged care. We have a lot that needs to be funded. So we need to look at our revenue base 100%. Been looking at we haven't actually been benefiting. Australians haven't been benefiting from their own resources. They've been sold off by multinational companies, and Australia has not been a beneficiary so much, and profits shipped offshore. So that actually needs to be looked at again, our resource rent tax. But we're now transitioning also again to mining rare earth minerals. So we need to look at that side of things. How will Australia benefit? We know what's happened in other countries such as Qatar, such as Norway, quite different countries. But Norway has how much? $2 trillion? $2 trillion in sovereign wealth built up for future generations. We have a $1 trillion debt. So it's a completely different way of looking at how we manage our resources and how we treat our resources. I'll let you have a say, Mon.
Look, we need once in a generation reform, but we get once in a generation reform less than once in a generation, unfortunately. I mean, the government needs the social license to be able to look at all of our tax system. We've seen what happens when you tinker with one part of the tax system. You can ask Kevin Rudd, you can ask Julia Gillard, you can ask John Hewson, you can ask Bill Shorten. You lose government. And this is a government which is really risk averse. So they're not going to put in anything massive in the next 18 months. I do think they're going to do something to the stage 3 tax cut. I'm not going to get rid of them altogether. But what they really need is to look at all of those things, franking credits, land tax, GST, all of those things. And they need to take that to this election. And I hope that they will have the courage to do that. And I hope that Australians will have the courage to look at that and understand that if we want to address intergenerational inequity, we have to change our tax system.
Well, there's two different types. We need to look at the system as a whole. One, we are taxing work and income heavily, but we're not taxing wealth accumulation in the same way. So it's something that you look at the whole tax system at one time.
To give you a sense of it, Australia is the largest exporter of LNG in the world. Qatar is the second largest. Qatar collects 20 times more tax than we do on their gas. Some people think our system's not working. The gas industry think it's working just fine. Next question.
Thanks, Richard. David Flannery's my name, and thank you both for coming tonight. Great to hear the answers to these questions. My questions are about the dynamics of working with the other independents. You've already touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about it. You've both been, obviously, as independents, along with a group of other women that are under so-called teal banner. And you can probably add Helen to that because she's helped you a real lot.
Helen will tell you she's not a teal.
No, I know, but
she's an orange.
She has helped you a real lot, obviously.
She has. And
we've seen you doing press announcements together as a group. I've even seen you doing push-ups in the Marble Hall together. So the question is, Despite what you say about the benefits of working as independents for your own communities, you've obviously got a wider national agenda. How much do you feel like the Teals are a party in almost in their own right?
Thank you. Yes. Where to start with that? Mon created T-shirts last Christmas.
Tell everyone about the T-shirt.
What would Helen do? But Helen, Helen is an inspiration. She and Kathy McGowan prior to that was the original community independent. There have been independents before, but really what it comes down to is we are answerable only to our communities. And yes, they do have a national agenda. People do think more broadly than just themselves and their own sort of electorate boundary. It's been an enormous privilege to work with the other independents. It's incredible. They are all amazing, but you'll probably notice sometimes we vote the same, sometimes we vote very differently, sometimes it's split, sometimes one's off, but we are all responding to how we think our electorates would want us to vote. And we're doing our own sort of surveys and polling and talking to people within our electorates, and that's who we are answerable to. So although we do work collaboratively together on a lot of things, and we do debate, it's a really healthy way of approaching politics. Having a robust debate doesn't mean that we will end up coming to the same conclusion, but it really is pushing each other to think really clearly about why would you do this? What about that problem? What about this? And I find it really fascinating. In Switzerland as well, they have that kind of approach where they bring people in and actually debating politics is part of their culture. So they commonly have referendums on all different levels, but people are happy to discuss politics, not because it's politics, because it's issues that are important to them. And I think when it comes down to it, you can call us the Teals, it's a media label, but I help create that grassroots movement, and ultimately I'm answerable only to my community.
So people want us to almost to be a party, but we love each other. We absolutely do love each other, but I can't see that any way that we would ever be a party. We have a party, but we actually think very differently about different things at different times, and we do have robust discussions. And when we walk into the house, I have no idea usually how the others are going to vote on things. But at the same time, Kate asked me a question today about the NDIS. Zoe texted me the other day to ask me a question about the PBAC and how to get a drug for somebody. I've asked Allegra questions about tax. We are really pragmatic and sensible. We are dearly fond of each other. We've all been through an extraordinary experience, and there have been times when we've had to reach out to each other and say, this is brutal and I'm really struggling with it, or my family hates me, or what size your feet because I've just lost a heel. But I think we'll ever be a party. I just can't see it. And it's much more fun that we're not, because I'm there for Kooyong. And as I've said, I'm there to represent my electorate. And Edmund Burke said, I owe my electorate not, the responsibility to do, I can't remember the words exactly, but, to vote with my head and with my heart on the things that they elected me to represent them on. I don't want me to be part of a party, and my opinions are in some ways quite different from some of the others at different times. So it's a fascinating thing. I do not think that we'll ever form a party. I can't see it.
And as much as the electorates have their similarities, they also have their differences. So that's where our differences come in, I think, as well. And really, I think this community independent movement really came from the fact that people were feeling that they weren't being represented, that party politics came first and that they came second. And so it really was a response to people feeling that they wanted to be genuinely represented. And so that's why there's that direct relationship. And that's why it's so important to be independent and continuing to listen to the people in the electorate, not so much to a party. And there's no party factions either, which is fantastic.
Also, a fish can't taste the water it swims in, and Australians I don't think realise how our party system is radically different from party systems in most countries. We have the most, by international standards, the most outrageous binding party discipline. So I don't know if everyone here's heard my joke, but do you know what Americans call crossing the floor? Voting. No, there's no term for it, right? On every bill, Republicans and Democrats cross on every bill. And this is incredibly common in the UK. They have what's called a 1-line, 2-line and 3-line whip on all of their votes. And a 1-line whip is be nice if you voted yes. A 3-line whip is we really want you to vote yes, or, we'll punish you at pre-selection. But if the leader tried to run a 3-line whip on every bill, they wouldn't stay leader. Because in other countries, members of parliament would actually up for precisely the reasons that you guys have just described. So I think an interesting element of this is that one of the things that you're offering voters that's different from major parties would vanish if you actually kind of formed a party and had to pretend to agree with things you disagreed on.
Look,
which
I
is
got
normal.
a lot of stick for the fact that I was briefly a member of the Laddie and the Liberal Party during the election tried to make out that I was a Labor stooge. But one of the things that I will never forget Penny Wong trying to pretend that she was against gay marriage and thinking I could never be part of a party for that reason, because I couldn't, in any conscience, I just couldn't do it. And I think most of us feel the same way, and that's probably one of the disadvantages of electing middle-aged, Soph, people who know their own mind, is that I don't know that any of us could function within a party if we're going to be told what to do that way.
Yeah. Next.
Hello. Yeah, thank you both for coming. It's been really great to listen to you. My question is about the proposal for the Citizens' Assembly to break the impasse on the housing. I'm curious, what's the format? Why are you proposing it? And just among friends, do you think that the government and the Greens are going to go for it? Thank you.
I think the Greens currently have their own agenda that they're really pushing at the moment. They're busy with that. I think there is how it will work. So a citizens' assembly is similar to a jury. It's the same. People across the country, they will be reaching out to people across the country in a randomised way, and then trying to also, parallel what society looks like and what homeowners or non-home owners look like. So you have a representative sample of Australia. So when we talk about a citizens' assembly, it's not just talking about people in our electorates. It's a national and nationwide initiative. It should be a real circuit breaker as well, because as you said, there is an impasse. This problem has been growing for decades now, and we've seen it put in the too hard basket too many times, and policies that have been come up, which has actually made the problem worse. So now we need to be courageous, and often to get that social license or that mandate, one of the most powerful ways we can do that is that if people across Australia, everyday Australians, come up with that idea, an informed decision. And the other thing about a citizens' assembly is they hear from experts, but they are also able to drive who they want, where they want more information. So they drive that process as well. So it really is quite a powerful mandate that comes out of it, and provides a lot of license for ideas and solutions that may not otherwise be on the table.
So the idea is that you call together like 100 people, and as so said, they get selected randomly, and we bring them together for 8 weekends, I think, in a row, 8 weekends in total, and they have the opportunity to listen to experts on financing and the like, and then come up with some useful suggestions. Now, the thing is, that's not a binary thing in terms of there are lots of other things that can be done at the same time. Housing availability and affordability in Australia is a wicked problem, and it's going to take a generation to work out. The Housing Australia Future Fund, even those of us who voted for it know that it is completely inadequate. 30,000 houses in about 5 years, when we need a minimum of 75,000 increasing over time. It's too. We know that that's not enough. We voted for it. I think I'm speaking for Sophie. I voted for it because I thought it was better than nothing. There's no reason why the Citizens' Assembly couldn't be done in parallel with other sorts of initiatives. We need lots of different initiatives, and lots of things levers pulled at different points. The Greens got their own barrow, and the government, they should support the Citizens' Assembly. It's a good idea. It'll cost them. It's costed at $1.7 million. From cash, that's that's nothing in the scale of the sorts of billions and billions of dollars that we're wasting on other initiatives. So I think the government should do it. Whether or not they commit to it will be a matter of interest. If they don't, then we're looking at funding it by other means. It's just a useful, pragmatic solution. It's pretty much what the crossbench sees its role is to come up with useful, pragmatic alternatives when you get to a bit of an impasse.
Great. This might have to be our last question. I'm sorry. No pressure.
No pressure. How about a sugar tax?
How about a sugar tax? Yes. Good question. So we know that a quarter of children in Australia are of the healthy weight range and 2/3 of adults are above the healthy weight range. So that whole idea of it's an individual problem is just holds no water whatsoever. It is a societal problem that needs a societal response, and we need to build healthy environments for people to live in. And I'm currently looking at just one aspect of how we build that healthy environment, and that is junk food advertising, because we know it's all over the TV, it's all over radio, but worse than that, it's all over online, and our children are being targeted individually and preyed upon. So their activity online is mined and harvested, labels, their interests are built up, there's thousands of labels to individuals, and then that information is sold on to different companies, and then those children or people are then targeted and deluged with particular advertising. We know that gambling advertising and junk food advertising and alcohol are particularly targeted at young boys and men, and girls it's alcohol and junk food. So that's one that I'm looking at. And then sugar tax should be on the table at some point.
Yeah, hard yes.
You're lobbying for votes there. Look, we are going to have to draw it to a close. Thank you all very much for coming along. It's great to have two politicians at Politics in the Pub. The Australian Institute has been running Politics in the Pub for, 15 years or so now. It seems like a long time. And I remember when we set it up, someone lobbied me quite hard against calling it Politics in the Pub because, politics is a dirty word, and why not talk about policy in the pub, or why not talk about democracy in the pub? And I kind of get that, but for me, as I said before, you can't have democracy without politicians. The act of building support for something, the act of putting something on the agenda, the act of building support and pushing things through Parliament is politics, and it's a skill, and you literally can't have democracy without it. So I'm always excited when we get actual politicians here at Politics in the Pub. Really excited to see it standing room only when we get politicians here at Politics in the Pub. And so on behalf of the Australia Institute, can everyone please join me in thanking Dr. Sophie Scamps and Dr. Monique Ryan. Now, just before you race off, Ebony will shoot me if I don't tell you about our next event, because apparently I do have the details for it. But no, I can't seem to find it. So anyway, again, as I said, sign up. Oh, here goes my voice. Sign up if you can. Donate on the way out. There's a tap and go there. But thank you all so much for coming. And just, again, another round of applause for fantastic guests.
I'll just say very quickly as well, thank you all so much for coming along. I agree. It's so important that everyone is involved in their democracy. When I say we talk politics, we're just talking about what's important to us, and everyone should be involved in that conversation. So thanks for coming along. Good to see you.